Hello. Ladies. Expertly pouring, are we? It's cozy.
You need to come on Loose Women in the Rain with me. Trust me, you get your own mug then.
I've always fancied doing something like that. They've never put me up for Loose Women.
I know people, Tracy.
Oh, David's chair.
Tracy, we were getting along so well.
No, I was banned at primary school from playing football.
Did you play with fellow MPs?
We're all friends, except on Wednesdays at Prime Minister's Question, and we're all friends. You know, government shouldn't be deciding kick-off time. Speaker would stand up and say, Dame Tracey Crouch, and I'd be like, oh, that's me. You know? Doing sport is very much about my mental well-being as well as my physical well-being. Quite often get people saying, you know, what's government got to do with football? Get government out of football.
Brought to you by SkyBet.
Well, we are very, very lucky today because we are joined by Spurs loving former sports minister and an FA qualified coach. Let's just fire that in there as well. And of course, a Dame Tracey Crouch. Dame, I mean, that's something that you get used to, is it? Is it something that you insist is written on your letters and everything else throughout the school? Is that how the teachers have to address you? How does it
Only
work?
at home.
Only at home. I like that.
It's very important.
Your little boy, Dame. I'm hungry today. Yes.
I was made a CBE a few years ago, and for a little while, my son would go around the house saying, we have to do what mummy says because she's the commander. Which used to annoy my husband quite a lot.
Beautiful, yeah.
When my dad got his, my sister went into my mum's social media. She doesn't really very active on social media, but she's got like Twitter and Instagram, and my sister went in and changed all her profiles to put Lady Dalgleish in. And my mum was mortified, but she's got no idea how to change it back. She's like, it's not even mine, it's not even mine.
Because the flip side is, if you're made a dame, your husband doesn't become anything.
Yes.
So, you know...
Quite right.
Well, he was trying to get me to turn it down on the basis that it was sexist. Why isn't no dear?
I'm holding on to it.
Did you do your social media straight away? I'd have been in there like, I'd be leaving the palace like, my handle on Instagram.
Just wear the little medal the whole time. And just well, you get told quite a while in advance. So I was actually announced that I was a dame back in April. Okay. So Parliament, I was still in Parliament at the time, all of a sudden instead of being Tracey Crouch on the TVs, you become Dame Tracey Crouch, which is quite weird. You know, the speaker would stand up and say, Dame Tracey Crouch, and I'd be like, oh, that's me. But I've only just gone and picked, or had the investiture at Windsor Castle. So.
It was Prince of Wales, of course, as well.
It was, yes.
And I think you wrote on your Twitter, X, about what you chat about. And clearly there's a long queue of people behind you, so you don't get to talk as much as you'd like to. But yes, what was the little sort of chat, the mini chat that you get to have in that moment?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to meet him on a number of occasions before, so there was a sort of kind of sense of familiarity,
of course.
Which was quite nice. So I felt very relaxed. People going, "Are you really nervous?" It's like, no, I've met him before. So we spoke about the NFL. In my new world, outside of politics, the NFL are a client, so he'd been doing some American football the day before. So I was able to say to him, oh, I understand you're quite a good throw. He was very proud of himself, rightly so. So we spoke about that. And then we talked about women's football. And I was saying that I was taking my son to watch the Lionesses because I think it's really important that boys watch women's football as well. I was saying, bring the boys, you know. See, one of those being the air to throw.
Exactly.
And then and we talked about the rise of women's sport in general. And we talked about the New England appointment. So
that was quite a lengthy chat, to be fair.
People coughing in the background.
I cried the entire...
There's other people's families sitting in the audience, sitting there going, where was that?
Yeah, exactly. We moved straight on.
Sport. I cried my eyes out when Frank got his OBE.
Did you?
I took his two girls and I sat and I cried the entire time. I was overcome with pride. I really did. I found it really... No one else was crying around me. They were all beaming and happy. But I have to say, it is a moment, is what I'm trying to say for you and indeed your family.
We went, when Dad got his, and we went... So we got the four of us, I'm one of four. and we were all allowed to go along with my mum, and the four of us don't get together very often, and we were a bit giddy, and we all reverted to being children, and we're sitting, in Buckingham Palace, and we're all messing about and just like making stupid jokes, and started sort of laughing at each other, and we all started to giggle, and my mum was at the end, and she smacked my younger sister on the arm, so we all sat really quietly, and then my brother turned around, he went, "You're in trouble with mum."
That'll teach you.
And we all kind of reverted.
You got the look, did you? Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm nearly 50.
So what do you think of the new England manager, if that was obviously a topic of conversation?
Oh, I just went into politician mode. I said, well, time will tell, we'll have to wait and see. And of course, he didn't offer any kind of opinion either. So, and time will tell.
Yeah. Being a Spurs fan at the moment under Ange Postecoglou is, well, from the outside looks incredibly exciting, incredibly unpredictable. How are your nerves watching Ange Ball in action?
Oh, look, you're still a Spurs fan, right? So I've got years of getting used to the fact that the hope kills. So it is exciting, but I'm a really pessimistic Spurs fan. I would go to every single game. My friend just gets so cross with me. I go to every single game thinking we're going to lose it, and then come away, thrilled that we've won it. But it was an exciting game. There could have been more goals on Saturday.
But that style of football as well. I mean, particularly for somebody who grew up watching Spurs in the era in which you started watching them, that style of football must feel much more familiar than maybe it would have been under previous managers.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to watch, but I have a heart rate monitor on my watch, and I think my heart rate was about 105 for most of the match on Saturday. Just like, come on, please, can we just score like 4 goals and then not look like we're going to concede 4 goals? So it's great, it's fun, but I'm still a Spurs fan. You still sit there through clenched teeth.
It's interesting, really, Tracey, because you came from a family that weren't necessarily sports orientated or indeed politics orientated, and these are two of your major passions in your life. And you talk about Spurs. I'm intrigued as to where that started, if you didn't come from that footballing family, and where your sort of yearning to be part of this sporting world came from, because you truly believe that exercise, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but you think a lot of things can be solved through sport and indeed exercise on a personal level.
So my parents were not into sport. My dad may be a bit of Formula One, but definitely not football. And when they divorced, we moved to an estate where my sister and I were the only girls. So you had to kind of, really fit in, otherwise they weren't going to play. I was only 8. So I started to, actually watch a lot of sport, play a lot of sport, and they all supported Tottenham, so I supported Tottenham. Fortunately, it was a good time for Tottenham in the early 80s anyway, so it was fun being part of that movement. But I just played all sports. I was one of these feral children that was just never in. I had rules that I had to be home before it was dark or at tea time.
Yeah, when the street lights come on.
Yeah, exactly. And then, on occasions where I would do something that meant that I was grounded, after about, 2 hours, my mum would be so fed up with me bouncing off the walls inside that I'd have my grounding lifted and I'd be straight back out again. So I kind of just played sport, and it was everything. And it was in the street, it wasn't, we weren't near a wreck or anything.
But that was really unusual. I mean, we're not going back that far in time, but I know when I was growing up, it was, it wasn't something that girls did, especially not in that way, in the sense of, not in terms of playing football on the street, but girls getting involved in that, even in the playgrounds and stuff.
I wasn't allowed.
I
wasn't allowed. I was banned at primary school from playing football. So, so I was sports captain in primary school. I was in the netball team. I was house captain. But if they caught me playing football in the playground, I would get told off.
Well, even just in playtime?
Yeah, just not allowed in playtime. It wasn't a girls' sport. So, obviously my feral nature, I would get told off. I'd go and stand and look forlorn, and then as soon as the teacher had gone back round the corner to tell somebody else off about something, I'd be straight back on. It was a tiny school anyway, so but I just used to play all the time at home, play in the garden. I was constantly breaking pots and killing my mum's plants and the fish because the ball would go and I used to frighten them. But I did everything. I played American football because it was on Channel 4 and played cricket. BMX.
That was the era of the fridge, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When the NFL was on Channel 4, I remember that really well.
Yeah, I just did everything, but I wasn't allowed to play. And actually, what I've discovered as a grown-up is that there were pockets of organised girls' football, and potentially even where I grew up, but it just didn't feature. It certainly wouldn't have featured as something that my mum would have gone and looked for me.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't play it. And then I went to an all-girls secondary school, and that was the traditional, athletics and tennis in the summer, and hockey and netball, the freezing winter, or gymnastics if the weather was awful. So again, just didn't do it. So it wasn't until I went to university that I played competitive football.
And is that when the coaching element came into play then? Or
No.
At what stage did you kind of feel like, actually, I quite like to be on that side of the pitch at the same time?
So the honest thing is, I started coaching when I was 30 because I was playing for a team in London, and I was 30 and the rest of the girls were in their 30s as well. And we were playing like literally 17, 18-year-olds who would come out, score 8, have a fag at half time, and then say, can I score another 8? And it just stopped being fun. And I thought, but I didn't want to give up on the whole thing. So I took my coaching badge, and that's when I started to coach girls down in Chatham and really enjoyed it. Did it for 8, 9, 10 seasons, something like that. Took them from under 10s right up to ladies. And then it sort of had a natural ending in that I was pregnant with my son, but they were all going off to university or going off to work or whatever. So it just finished.
And
I've just started, actually, in full circle, I've just started playing vets football now.
Do you know what? When we were sort of prepping for this, I looked up, what position do you play? And it said striker or right winger, and I thought, well, obviously.
Yeah, what can I say? And I still, more striker now because, I can't get back as often as I used to. I've never really been good in defence. In fact, the only time I ever got injured when I tried to tackle somebody in defence and ended up with a stud in my knee. But that was at university, and it was one of the old days where the coach just literally took the stud out of my knee, patted me on the bottom and sent me back out onto the pitch. So, it was a striker.
Yeah. Did you play with fellow MPs as well? I know there's a lot of kind of inter-football going on, and a lot of women and men sort of gathering to kind of play together or against each other as well, kicking lumps out of whoever.
We're all friends, except on Wednesdays at Prime Minister's Question, we're all friends. Yes, I did. And actually, I'd been a researcher for quite a few years, and I was allowed to play for the parliamentary football team as a researcher. Then when I got elected in 2010, quite sort of kind of famously, the rules had changed, and I wasn't allowed to play with the parliamentary team because it was all men, and mixed football rules meant that I couldn't play with them. So eventually, it took some time, but eventually we set up a women's football team. And that was quite good. I captained that for a few years. Mainly played five-a-side, to be honest with you, and still there's a five-a-side league in which the teams still play, which I miss them enormously, but they're all doing really well.
Who's part of that? Who's in it?
Just fellow MPs, but also any pass holders. So we get researchers and members of the press, and who've got passes. It's great fun. But you play against some really good teams. Again, they're all really young. Get on there, and I feel like I could be their mother.
Who's the best MP footballer?
There's been some really good footballers over time. Surprisingly, Ian Duncan-Smith is actually very good. I know, people always think that. Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham.
And they're very competitive because that's Everton Liverpool as well, isn't it?
Jim Murphy, who's an old Scottish Labour MP.
And now, hang on, you've got history with Jim Murphy in football, haven't you?
Yeah, I megged him. Scored a goal through his legs.
Nice.
But then Steve Rotherham will tell you that he megged me. I mean, literally, it's like the first thing. If we were ever in a room together, he will come up and say, "Oh, I megged her." It's like, seriously, Steve, it was like years ago.
Do you know what's really interesting is how the escapism that sport brings to so many people, to most fans in fact, but even to our politicians who, you know, we, like you say, on Wednesdays, and we see, you know, like politicians on Sunday morning, sort of breakfast television, looking serious and talking about serious issues, and yet there's something really quite humbling to remind all of us that you are still human, normal people, albeit with these very important jobs. And talking football or sport is just like the rest of us. You might have a moan about what happened that weekend, or your team played well. They did. That's the normal chats that you guys all seem to have behind what we see.
For sure. I mean, the one thing that I do have a pet hate, which is politicians who pretend to be interested in sport for the sake of votes.
That's the complete opposite, obviously.
I mean, it just drives me nuts.
But best just to say, do you know what? It's not my area of expertise. I'm not particularly interested, but I appreciate how important it is, and move on.
Yeah.
But it's when, you know, I go to my local rugby club, go and watch Chatham play football. You know, that's because I like it. I'm actually really happy to go and sit and watch. No one's forcing me. You know, I mean, certainly at Chatham Town, I always had access to the exec suite, which was lovely. Particularly if I took my son, because then he would go and hoover up all the biscuits. You know.
Did you declare that?
I don't think it would meet the threshold. But at the rugby club, you know, they always used to say this is a safe place for you, right? Because you're here, we know you're here because you want to watch the sport, you know. And it was, I mean, I never did this, but I know that I could have got drunk, danced on a table, fallen off a table, vomited in the corner, and it would never have got into a newspaper or anything, because that's the kind of environment that sport sometimes has. It wraps its arms around you as well. Now, I hasten to add, that's never happened.
That's not what the clip's going to say by the time they finish.
Once you've edited it. But, you know, it can provide that real comfort zone. And you are human. And of course, people do come up and still talk about politics. But quite often, if you're there with your regular crowd, people will say, "Mate, not now."
Yeah.
She's watching the football. She's watching the rugby.
But the other side of that, I think James O'Brien coined that phrase, footballification of politics, which is this kind of blinkered tribal approach to party politics. And I wondered if you have seen that happen and you've seen that change during your time as an MP.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just during my time. You do join a tribe. I mean, I always struggle with people who cross the floor in politics, because that would be like me suddenly supporting Arsenal. And I find that a very bizarre sort of kind of aspect in politics. But, you know, it's always been tribal. You do kind of pick early on your party. But I also do think it is like football, because you don't always have to love your team, right? You can fall out about the manager's tactics, you know, where you should have, you know, done something and you didn't. And that's the same with political parties. You know, the Conservative Party has gone through a number of leaders recently. You don't have to like them all, and you don't have to believe in them all, but you're still part of that family, you're still part of that tribe. So there are a lot of similarities in it.
Yeah. And I just, the reason I thought it was interesting to ask you about that is because a lot of what you've done has been all parliamentary groups. So you've been having to deal across those lines.
Well, I actually get on really well with lots of people. I've never been particularly sort of kind of overtly tribal. I am lifelong Conservative. I will always be a Conservative. I have my moments with where they're the direction that they're going in, but cut me in half and that's who I am. But that said, I never went into the chamber and thought everything we're doing is right and everything you're saying is wrong. And I've never been that kind of pointy finger person, and I've never sort of kind of written on my social media channels, "Oh, you know, the Prime Minister said such and such a day, isn't he marvellous?" Because actually, there is a truth that, you know, things like the budget, there will always be winners, but there will also always be losers. So you have to have that emotional understanding that, you know, you can celebrate or you can recognise that there are good things in some of the things that we do, but there's always somebody else that's going to be impacted negatively. So I've always been a bit sort of kind of careful about doing things like that. And that's meant that people have never really seen me as a sort of kind of, you know, pure ideological kind of conservative. So everything I've done, all the issues that I've been involved in have always been cross-party and have that consensus. And some of them aren't, they're huge issues, but they're not party political. So loneliness or sport or, gambling or things like that. And they're not party political issues, but they impact, huge parts of society.
Of course they are.
What are the biggest issues that you think sort of within government, current government now, particularly with football? I'm sure we'll get onto the independent regulation and a lot of that and get stuck into that. But what do you think some of the biggest issues are that need facing?
For government today, I mean, I do think obviously issues around housing and how you can sort of kind of build communities and that sort of stuff, that doesn't have to be tribal. That doesn't have to be sort of kind of, party political. I mean, I would love to be able to pick up the phone to Angela Rayner, who, by the way, I got on very well with and is very funny. But I'd love to be able to pick up the phone to her and say, when you are designing this huge programme for housing development, think about sport as part of that. If you fly into Glasgow, you look out the window, you see all the different sporting activities that are on offer. You see pump tracks, you see basketball courts, athletic tracks, as well as football pitches, rugby pitches, golf courses. You fly over the south of England, you don't see that. And so I just think, actually, if you're going to develop large numbers of sort of kind of, housing estates, make sure you have all of these huge kind of multiple options on the table.
Yeah, and I'm going to consult my notes here because I'll tell you why, because your titles were Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Sport, Heritage and Tourism, and then the Under-Secretary of State for Sport, Civil Society and Loneliness. So although we kind of blanket that as Minister for Sport, you covered so many different areas, but that link between politics and sport felt like such a natural fit for you. Was that something that you always thought, that's where I can make a difference? Everybody goes into politics and you might be frustrated after a little while about what you can actually get done, but everybody goes in with that intention of changing things for the better.
Yes, but I never necessarily just wanted to be a minister. So, and people used to accuse me of not being ambitious enough because I never wanted to be Prime Minister. So you're not ambitious enough. I just don't want to be Prime Minister. Because for me, ambition is about doing your job well. And my ambition was always, I wanted to be a really good constituency MP. The only job I would have accepted in government with that in mind is Sports Minister because it was a natural sort of kind of fit. But even that, when David Cameron rang me up and offered me the job, I said, can I think about it? He was like, what? Why? And I was like, well, I just want to be able to know whether or not I can do a good enough job for you. And he was like, it's a round peg in a round hole. Of course you can. He did let me think about it, by the way, only for half an hour. I think I'd made up my mind in about a minute, but I waited 29 minutes to call back. But I think sometimes women in particular do lack confidence about what it is that they can do and what they can achieve. And I just wasn't sure whether or not this was right for me. And then I thought, of course it's right for me, let's go for it.
Yeah.
And sorry, Kelly. No, just how difficult was it to change things or to make things happen from your perspective? Because particularly when you get a new job, you go sort of, you're all fired up, aren't you? But it's obviously in politics, we know it doesn't work that quickly.
It doesn't, and I think that was sometimes a bit frustrating. But also, you're just battling with lots of different departments who are bigger than you. And you just really have to sort of kind of nail your issue and why it's important that it goes ahead. And sometimes there's a fragmentation of the brief as well. So, for example, I didn't have control or responsibility for school sport. And actually it was one of the issues that I did raise with Dave Cameron. I said, well, can I be the school sports minister? And he said, no, because that's already in the Department of Education. And I said, well, I've already failed then. Because actually, if you're not getting kids loving sport, not just doing sport, but loving sport, then it makes it even more difficult to get them continuing that habit throughout their lifetime.
Absolutely.
The agenda, the physical health agenda, sits within the Department of Health. So trying to get people using physical activity as a means of keeping themselves well and out of hospital for whatever conditions or whatever reason doesn't sit within the sports brief. You know, if you think about issues around, you know, elderly frailty, you know, getting them to do movement and, you know, things like that's so important. It's not in the sports brief.
So you're dealing with these sort of satellite kind of situations around you, and you're not having really any power, and you can't influence. Like that's actually deeply frustrating. Then.
Yeah, and another example of things like, you know, youth crime, gang crime, things like that. That sits within the Home Office. And quite often you'd go into meetings, cross-ministerial departmental meetings, and, you know, the Home Office Minister would say, well, we need to do something about gang crime. You know, Tracy, can you get sport to fund more projects? And you're like, actually, it's already funding quite a lot of projects, but with the greatest respect, it sits within your department, you should be funding it. You know, so there's actually all these sorts of different challenges.
And that's where the politics bit comes in, isn't it? Where you're having to deal with heads of departments, and we know no matter what walk of life, if you're dealing with lots of different people protecting their area, it's very difficult to get anything done.
And also, there's always, you know, the challenge as well that you have people who are higher up the, you know, government chain than you, who have their own ideas about sport, have their own passions and desires, and they want to do X, and they come in and say, you know, what we need to do is X, Y, Z, and you sit there thinking, right, as somebody who's completely gone under the skin of this particular sport, I can tell you that's not going to work, but you have to smile sweetly and then go back with all the reasons why it's not going to work in a more formalised way. But and, you know, and there's some real challenges there as well. Yeah, and they always push the past the buck.
How do you switch off from that? You know, when you go home at the end of the day, and I'm guessing, you know, there's lots of talk about, I know it's happening in Australia at the minute, where they're trying to change the rules of emails stop at 5 o'clock, you have your weekends and all the rest. So that doesn't really happen in politics.
No.
I know Keir Starmer did suggest it did on a Friday night or whatever recently, but that doesn't. How do you switch off from all of that? Is it back to sport again?
Going to sport was my point of switch off.
Yeah.
And for me, doing sport is very much about my mental well-being as well as my physical well-being. You know, to the extent, if I haven't been for a run for a few days, my husband, like, please, will you just go for a run or go to the gym? Just do something, because you can, you know, begin to see that I'm getting a bit sort of kind of, you know, frustrated. And I always thought that I did quite a large project with athletes as minister, because for many of us, sport and physical activity is a way of controlling our mental health. But if you are a sports person, what is your outlet that is helping you with your mental health? Because it presumably wouldn't be sport, because that's your job. You know, I didn't go from politics to go home and read about politics. That's not going to do my mental health or well-being any good whatsoever. So, you know, you don't switch off is the answer. I do now, but I didn't then.
But yeah, it's the danger, isn't it, of making your hobby your job, and your passion your job, is that then, you know, your duty is kind of all bound up with what you do to switch off. So by 2015, when you took the position for the first time, is that, or in its first iteration rather, that would be you'd be kind of seeing the consequences of the 2012 Olympics as well, presumably. So there would have been a knock-on 3 years later from that.
Yes, and one of the first things I did when I came into government in 2015 was review our sports strategy, because it hadn't been reviewed, and the legacy from the 2012 Olympics was beginning to be questioned. And so it was like, okay, how can we try and make sure that we continue that legacy and have that long-term sustainability around those incredible games. And actually, I think people have often looked at the London 2012 as just in terms of participation, but for many it's also around the whole redevelopment of that side of London, which is incredible. But also, I think people's interested in different types of sports. And, you know, I do feel that contributed to the continual aspect around legacy. But then there was more than that. And much more came from that strategy as well.
Yeah. One of the biggest things, I guess, you tackled that you wanted to really get stuck into, and something that's still ongoing now, and I want to get stuck into this with you really, that the fan-led review and football governance, because I mean there's a lot to take on here, but why was that so important to you, and what did you want to achieve from it, and so how is it looking now?
So the fan-led review came out of actually quite a long process, which culminated in the attempted breakaway by the 6 top clubs in football into the Super League. But it started before then. It started long before even my time at DCMS, which is that there's always been these little scandals in football, or Bury going, bust and disappearing. And then the Super League breakaway. And those were the 2 kind of trigger points for the fan-led review, which is, okay, we've been talking about doing something for long enough now, let's have a proper look at the governance of football. Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister at the time. He asked me to lead the review. I just finished chemotherapy, actually, so it was all kind of, those early days were a bit kind of, sort of mad, but we managed to do quite a lot of it, and we took evidence from fans across the entire pyramid, across the country. We went beyond England and spoke to the nations as well, because they had an interest, but it was only really about the English pyramid that we were looking at. And then we took evidence from clubs, and actually everything just kept coming back to, we need to do something to make sure that there is financial sustainability in the game, a game that many people love, but actually many communities rely on. And that was the sort of kind of the outcome of Bury, which wasn't just about the football club, it wasn't just about the fans, it was about the whole ecosystem that supported the club. The challenge is that when we were talking about Bury, and we were talking to people that were very heavily involved in the whole process, was that everywhere they went to, people were saying, it's not my problem. So they'd go to the EFL and say, it's not for us, it's for the FA. They'd go to the FA and the FA would say, it's not us, go to the EFL. And so part of that was, as the outcome is making sure you have real defined rules as to who is responsible for what in football. But what was clear is that there were issues around owners and directors tests, there were, the financial propriety, all that sort of aspect, which weren't being looked at. We just have brought it all together into this independent football regulator. It is solely about the financial sustainability. It's about the business of football. So quite often get abuse from people saying, what's government got to do with, football? Get government out of football. And it's like,
but this perhaps is going to be one of the unintended consequences of having the independent regulator, is suddenly you're going to have government put... doesn't affect you, as having stood down as an MP, and also because it's now a Labour government who are going to be putting this through. But there are going to be football questions now asked of the government, because in the public's eye, football and government are inextricably going to be linked by this.
Well, the way the legislation is drawn up, certainly the way the legislation that was introduced into the last Parliament, and I'm expecting it to be quite similar when it comes forward shortly, is that it is independent of government, that it is nothing to do with the day-to-day business of the sport of football, but just the business of football. They're really quite strict rules in there, and the intention of it is that it doesn't go beyond its remit, and all the guidance and everything around it will be that. There are some things in there that I think could be toned down, and in the last version of it, the government issue around adhering to foreign policy advice, I tried to change that particular clause so that it wasn't that the football regulator must pay attention to government foreign policy, but that it may. And that's a real subtle difference.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I think from a football fan's perspective, that there is not just, there was the controversial takeover of Newcastle United, which is the public investment fund of Saudi Arabia, Manchester City case that is ongoing at the moment with the Premier League UAE, another ally of the UK. And the worry would be that as allies of our country, that they're going to be able to put pressure on government. Is that a possibility? Is that something that would happen? Because I think if you're a football fan who thinks they don't want sovereign states to own football clubs, that's not going to stop this, is it? The regulator?
No. And it's all about the owners and directors test, and it's making sure that you have the right owners. But I also think that sometimes we do overthink this aspect of football and ownership in football. I always find it slightly bizarre that people have strong views about PIF ownership of Newcastle, but they don't have strong views about PIF ownership of other things, including significant stakes in, I think, Disney and Live Nation, where people go off to Glastonbury.
But you know this from your real life and from your working life as well as sports minister, that there is an emotional connection to football clubs, and that can be used as you will want to do in a really positive way to bring people along with you. But if it's used, for example, for sports washing, then it's the same tool, but used in a different way, and it would be naive not to say that's one of the factors there. Which
is why the football regulator has to be sort of kind of very clear in what it is responsible for and everything else. But I do think that we do need to be careful about when we're sort of kind of applying rules of ownership. They have to be sort of kind of almost beyond that emotion. That's not to say that I don't, I certainly don't disagree with your view. You can't switch your club like you switch your gas provider, So, you're stuck. Go back to the tribal thing. You're stuck with that tribe, good times, bad times, whatever times, and that's why the sort of kind of the emotional connection is different. But that's not what the football regulator is about. The football regulator is, are you going to be able to run your football club in an appropriate way with the funds so that you don't see a bury, and you have that real-time monitoring and things like that. Personally, I would really like somebody who's got a financial background with an interest and understanding in football, as opposed to somebody who has got a football background with an interest in finance, because this is about the financial sustainability of the game. I think it's important that you understand how football works and you understand that emotional connection, and we understand why what you're doing is important. But personally, I want people to understand, things like capital and liquidity and solvency and, all these, kind of issues that people in the city deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And remember as well, it's nothing to do with the rules of the game, because I've spoken to fans about things like this on occasion. Well, the government just need to step in and help get rid of VAR. I'm like, well, that's got nothing to do with...
Always got that. And people would write to me and sort of kind of say, you need to step in on this. And I say, yeah, that's fine. If I step in on that, by the way, that also means I can appoint the England manager. Is that all right? Or I can decide what formation Spurs are going to play. And actually, that it is really important that that's not involved. And we shouldn't be, government shouldn't be deciding kick-off times, and it shouldn't be deciding, ticket prices and things like that. It's not to say it shouldn't have a view. It just shouldn't be making that decision. And it's quite right, I think, for a government minister or a politician to stand up and say, it's really ridiculous that you've put a Boxing Day match on at 5 o'clock when the trains stop running back to Manchester at 7 o'clock or something. That's an okay thing to have a view on, but it's not then to say, so change it. Right, make it 3 o'clock or whatever.
I love the idea of you as being sports minister and a Spurs fan calling in cards on VAR just to, someone somewhere. Yeah. It wasn't a good weekend. I'm wanting to try and pull a few strings here. But the power you could have yielded if they'd left you, Tracey. Yeah.
If only for a dictatorship.
You mentioned your little boy Freddie there as well, Tracey. How difficult was it? You talk about these social engagements and all of the things that you had to try to do within the job, and then to obviously fit in everything else that comes with it. We talk about this all the time. How do you do it when you're a member of Parliament?
You just do it. You just do it in the same way that everyone does it. I always try to think of it, a member of Parliament is an important job, but it is just a job, right? Yeah. And the pressures that you have as a member of Parliament, they're different in that they're often very public, But the time pressures are no different to, you know, somebody who works 2 shifts at Tesco's to put food on the table and also make sure that they've got a Halloween costume ready and, you know, there's tea on the table. World Book Day. You're going in as Harry Potter again. Here's the glasses from the staff box.
We've still got the broom.
Here's my mascara from the scar. You just do it. You know, my husband's fabulous. I'm not just saying that because he'll watch this, but you know, he does pick up a lot of the front work. And
what was it like taking maternity leave? And did you feel like you actually switched off? You were the first minister to do that. You did the shared parental paternity-maternity leave with your husband as well, and it's great because he obviously is extremely hands-on and deals with helping you be able to carry on with work as and when, I'm presuming, you were ready to go back. Did you have like a set time frame of how much you wanted off? Could you switch off? Because everything in your life presumably has to be planned, but could you plan around that?
So it was rather wonderful timing because actually it was just after the Brexit debate and, you know, and the referendum and everything, and I was completely out of it. So while Westminster melted, you know, there was me sort of kind of changing nappies, you know, expressing all that sort of stuff, and having.
It's the only time being mother to a newborn is preferable. Getting a break.
And I never declared how I voted, which was great because everyone else was kind of forced into declaring to take a side, and I just didn't bother. And by the time I got back, it happened, and just cracked on with it. So that was sort of kind of one bonus. But I took 3 months for no other reason, and I could have taken longer, but I took 3 months for no other reason than the Rio Olympics were in August. So I wanted to come back in July, you know, get 6 weeks under my belt and then head over to the Olympics. I could have had longer.
Yeah. I'd have done the same.
But you also, you mentioned earlier, you were diagnosed with breast cancer in lockdown, which I don't know if the timing has an impact on how it affects you. You'll never know because it's a personal, you know, effect. But when you did that and you went through your treatment, you were still working, weren't you?
I actually think going through breast cancer in lockdown served me well. So I know lots of people have very different experiences and everybody's journey is very different. But we had hybrid parliament, so we were all on screens. So I remember dialing in for what's called an urgent question on football 3 days after my chemo. And you're off screen, sort of kind of until the point that you're on screen. I read out my speech, and then I turned my camera off, and I was just like, God, but of course nobody could see that, and I didn't have to stay, and I didn't have to listen to everybody else's contributions because, you know, I was wiped. And a lot of, all of our work in lockdown was email, so you could do that whenever. And I didn't have, you know, one of the things that people going through cancer often talk about is having FOMO, and I didn't have FOMO because no one was doing anything. So I didn't mind too much going through my treatment during lockdown. And I finished my radiotherapy in February, and I went back into Parliament in March, where we started to sort of kind of have that fairly slow integration. We didn't properly open Parliament until, I think, June or July. And people were coming back, and because they hadn't come in, and they were coming and saying, "Oh, it's so good to see you back." And I'm like, "I've been here since March. It's good to see you back." You know? But it was, So for me, it was a positive experience going through.
You would run to your chemo appointments, wouldn't you? Because you had heard or read somewhere along the line that exercise before a treatment was a very positive thing.
Correct. So my oncologist, who's an amazing man, he works in private practice as well. In his private practice, they get their chemo patients to do some cardio before their chemo infusion, because the evidence shows that by doing some form of exercise, raising your heart rate slightly, it helps with the side effects. So it reduces side effects. And so I used to walk fast to the hospital, which is about 45 minutes from home. But of course, because it was COVID, I then had to wait for about 5 minutes so that I didn't, sweat as they put the ray gun to me to check whether I had a temperature, and then go and have the infusion. And actually, I didn't really suffer horrendous side effects. I wasn't sick.
And did you exercise throughout that whole period?
Yeah.
Again, was that your therapy to deal with everything?
Regular walks. I cycled a bit, but I was under strict instruction not to go too mad. Had a turbo train at home, so if the weather was too poorly to go out on the bike, I'd just cycle at home. Walking mainly, being in nature, being with trees.
Which we were all doing at that time again, back to the FOMO thing. This is what you did, and yet it was also a therapy for something that was going on personally.
Absolutely. And it was just, and I say I didn't have particularly horrendous side effects. And I keep up my exercise now because, again, the evidence shows that if you do your 150 minutes each week, your risk of recurrence is lower.
Wow.
So that's why I try and keep up with my exercise.
Yeah.
Did that factor into your decision to step away from being an MP or to stand down from being an MP?
There were lots and lots of reasons as to sort of kind of why I wanted to move on, but one of those was that actually going through that cancer journey really gave me a sort of new lease of life. It sounds like a very bizarre thing to say, and again, I do recognise that everyone has a very different cancer journey, but for me, I always think that cancer saved my life. Because I think I was, talking only about being feral, I wasn't quite feral, but, I certainly was, not looking after myself as well as I should or could have been. And, lots of pressure and stress and doing exercise but not enough, drinking too much, not eating all the right things. And actually going through that cancer journey has made me completely refocus my mind on different things, different parts of life. And it does make you suddenly think, actually, we've only got one life and let's make the most of it. Let's, do, as many wonderful things as possible. I was reading about Chris Hoy and reading his interview. The positivity and the optimism that still comes out of, his journey is incredible. And I think you do have that mindset. And, I'm having a wonderful time at Hanover now, doing, a whole new world of communications and PR, something I've never, I've done bits of it before, but in a completely different way. And yet I have this brilliant work-life balance. I don't have the pressure, not just of being an MP, but also the pressure of everybody else that expects things from their MPs. And so it feels like a huge weight has come off my shoulders.
It gives you the power to say no sometimes as well, doesn't it? No, I don't want to do that today, and for your own happiness. You climbed Kilimanjaro in 2023, raised £153,000 for breast cancer. Will you have another big challenge coming up?
Not
is there anything
that.
else?
No. What is it?
Oh no, yes, because tell us about your tattoo.
In what way?
What is it? Describe it, because just
Kilimanjaro?
It's got Kilimanjaro, but it starts with the Swahili word for together, which is pamoja. And it was when we were going through it that the sort of kind of the phrase that was always being used by our leader was very much, we're doing this together. So pamoja, the whole time we just kept on saying it. So that's what it says.
Maybe get Andrew's face next to it if you win the Premier League.
Maybe not.
You mightn't have to worry. Dame Tracey Crouch, what a pleasure it's been chatting to you. Honestly, it's like talking to an old friend, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
Honestly.
And we could have kept going.
I know.
All the
Somebody
people behind us
as
are
well.
like,
No.
a bit like Prince William at the investiture. People behind.
Thank you.
We're very
for
much
joining
like
us.
Prince William.
Exactly. On our podcast, of course, not just football. Maybe that's it. Maybe we'll get the future Keen to come along next time with you. We can lengthen that chat out and we can talk more football and everything.
And we'll bring
else,
David
but
back for a reunion.
And obviously Peter Crouch, my brother.
Yes.
Your brother.
Absolutely, leave it with me. We can make that work. Thank you so much,
And that
Tracey.
is our Christmas special. Subscribe to The Overlap and catch every episode of Not Just Football and more.